All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Steve Haynes is going to go ahead and let more and more people in. We have quite a big group coming in, so we'll go ahead and do that. There are a couple of Lynn announcements I wanted to make sure that you know about this morning, and then we'll, as we ask you to put those in the chat, we'll share other announcements at the end of our meeting. But we're so glad to have everybody. This is normally just our Count Me In for Kids meeting that we do 5 times a year. But because of the content and the speaker we have today, we were so pleased to be able to share this with the other collaborative that we also work with, which is the Healthy Hopeful Community Collaborative, which started with our work in Northeast Oklahoma City. And then, of course, our Count Me In for Kids group. So we're glad to have you. All of you with us today. This is, we have a topic that is, it works for everyone, and certainly everybody in all of our collaboratives has been under stress. I did want to introduce our staff in case some of you don't know who they are. So we have our CEO, Steve Petty.
Hello, everyone.
Angela Cosby is our VP of Research and Operations. And then I see Anthony Covey just got on. He's our Director of Collaborative and Community Engagement. And then Mr. Steve Haynes, who is the Director of Marketing and Publications and Branding. And he is also our tech guru, guru that keeps things moving on this whole deal and designs a lot of our things, and so he makes us all look good. That's what he does. And so I'm glad for you to meet them if you didn't already know those who are with us today. The 2 announcements that I do want you to know about before we get started, many of you have done some hope training with us or been interested in doing the training on the science of hope. And I wanted to let you know that we do have a class starting on February 2nd, the afternoon of February 2nd. It'll go on from 1 to 5 on that day. And then on February 9th from 1 to 5 as well. And Steve has put the link for that in the chat. If you would like to register for that, we invite you to do so. Our next class probably won't be until the end of March. And so if you're interested in that, or you have any team members who are, we would love to have you on this group. And also, there are some of you who are on here who have already trained in Hope with us. And so if you have trained, Dr. Hellman is offering a new training through us for those people who have already trained in Hope with the Lynn Institute. It will be the only one that is offered, and that will take place on March 9th from 9 to 3, and Dr. Hellman will be training. So if you are interested in that, I'll put my name and number in the chat, and please let me hear from you. But you must have already gone through the Lynn Hope training that we do with oversight from Dr. Hellman. So let us know that, and we'll go from there. So we will go ahead with our program today, which I'm really excited about. I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Nathan Mellor. He's a thought leader, a 2-time TEDx speaker, author, and he is the CEO of Strata Leadership. He's an experienced executive coach who has provided thousands of hours of coaching for executive leaders. And he does that as a sounding board, thought partner, and a source of encouragement for leaders seeking to maximize their effectiveness. Since its founding in 2009, Strata Leadership has pursued its mission of elevating life at work. Each year, the professionals at Strata Leadership provide character and competence-based talent development services for hundreds of clients in nonprofit, for-profit, educational institutions, governmental agencies, and they do that throughout the U.S. and abroad. Now, Dr. Mellor, listen to this. This is impressive. Dr. Mellor earned his Doctor of Education in Organizational Leadership degree from Pepperdine University and his Master in Dispute Resolution degree from the prestigious Strauss Institute for Dispute Resolution at Pepperdine University School of Law, where he was named a Strauss Fellow. He earned both his Master of Science in Education and Bachelor of Arts from Harding University. That's over in Arkansas, for those of you who don't know where that is. It's a very prestigious university, private university. In 2008, 2008, Dr. Mellor was presented the Executive Pilot Award, which is the individual honor bestowed. It's the highest honor bestowed by the Oklahoma Ethics Business Consortium. In 2021, not too long ago, he was named an Oklahoma Journal Record Most Admired CEO. He is a fellow with the Institute of Coaching at McLean Hospital, a Harvard Medical School affiliate, and a member of the International Coaching Federation. His book, if you haven't read it, it's good. Sleeping Giants, Authentic Stories and Insight for Building a Life That Matters, is available via Monocle Press, Amazon, and Audible. I can endorse it. He also hosts the podcast, The Strata Leadership Show. Nathan lives in Edmond, and he has with his wife and 2 daughters. And I will tell you, it's my privilege to introduce him because he's one of my good friends, and I think the world of him, and I know you're going to love what he has to say today. So I hope you'll help me welcome Dr. Nathan Mellor.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and it is so good to see friends who are a part of this, and just grateful for the work that you're doing. This topic is also one that is an area of passion, and so I hope that as we go through today, as you have questions, that you'll feel free to put those in the chat, and then at the end we'll have a few minutes where we can talk about those things together. But your questions really matter, and I hope that you will bring those thoughts up as we get to that point. I also want to say this. Speaking of stress, it is nearly impossible to be in a learning mode when you feel overstressed. And even today, there's a lot going on. And what I would like to do is for you to think of this time that we have together as an oasis that has been created for you. I want you to be able to focus in on the concepts that we're going to be talking about today. And I want you to do something that you might not feel comfortable doing, which is to invest in yourself for the next hour. And so as we go through this, I want to ask you to really be conscious of the environment that you're in and to be able to create that oasis, because if you feel that stress, it makes it very difficult to be able to be in a learning mode. I'm really glad that you are a part of this, and I look forward to our time. I'm going to go till about 12:15, and then we will go into those questions and have the responses that are there. I'll try to follow along on the chat with comments that you might have or questions that you may have along the way. If you can have your video on, many of you cannot, but if you can, that helps tremendously. And so being able to see faces, in my opinion, communicating like this is an amazing gift. But being able to see you, it just makes it so much easier to be able to know if things that we're talking about are connecting with you or not. In a moment, I'm going to do what most of you had hoped I would do, which is to start a PowerPoint, because many of you woke up today and said, you know what? If I could just have one PowerPoint today, I think my day would be better off. And so I am going to do a PowerPoint because I think it's a helpful tool for us to look at some of the concepts that I want to talk about. I'll go back and forth between the PowerPoint and then just being able to introduce the thoughts without the PowerPoint. But I want to put that on the screen here in a moment so that you can follow along. And as we go through this, that does make it a little bit more difficult to be able to see the chat. I'll do my best to be able to have both of those things up and working. But if you have done anything like this recently, then you know that on my screen, it looks like one of the news channels and they have 17 things happening on the screen at one time. All right, so let me move this over here. So we're looking at stress management in challenging times. And these are challenging times. And when you're talking about leadership, when you're talking about what it means to be able to help other people go through challenging times, when you're going through them as well, it requires some intentionality here. And so we're going to get into the concept, and I want to make sure that we're using some similar vocabulary. But I love this quote from Gandhi. There is more to life than increasing its speed. I want you to process that for a moment. There's more to life than increasing its speed. That going faster does not necessarily mean we are getting closer to what we're trying to achieve in life. I want you to think about that idea. Then I want you to look at this slide. It's a pretty simple thought that you've likely seen before. If you look at the slide here, we've got on one side performance, along the bottom the stress level, your performance moving to peak performance to the top, and then the stress level at the bottom. You'll see there's optimum stress and then there's stress overload. And I want you to look at this and identify the options, and then to be able to look at this and say, this is where I am really. I want you to imagine I've put into the vents of all the places where you are truth serum. And so you're going to have to really respond with this, with the best answer that you can come up with here. But if you look at the far left-hand side, you've got people who are struggling in life because they are inactive and bored. Then it moves to healthy tension. Then you'll see people who are motivated. Then it goes to focused. And then we get to peak performance. Now, I want you to think of a time in your life when you felt like you were operating at peak performance. I want you to take a moment and think of a time in your life when you've been operating at peak performance, when you just seem to be in the flow. Things were working well, you felt effective, efficient, you looked forward to waking up on a Monday morning ready to go at it, that the passion level was high. I want you to think of a time when you have been operating at peak performance. I want you to have that in your thought, in your mind. Then I want you to see what happens, especially with leaders who care deeply. And so you get to that level, you're operating at peak performance, and then you see that there is still greater need out there. And so what will happen often is you'll take on more things and you take on additional things. And you start to see that people move from peak performance over to the right-hand side. And what they often begin experiencing is some fatigue. They feel a sense of fatigue, but the reality is if they can have a weekend and they have a long Saturday, they might bounce back. If you get 2 good nights of sleep in a row, you feel okay. You're fatigued, but you're still okay, but you're feeling it a little bit. And then that stress overload continues. It pushes a little bit farther, and it goes from fatigue to exhaustion. And when you look at exhaustion, that's more than just being able to recover with a long weekend. Exhaustion being to that point where you just don't seem to be able to bounce back. You feel that sense of exhaustion that runs deeper. It's not just not getting a good night's sleep. This is something that is, you can feel that exhaustion level increasing. And then it goes from there with that stress continues to overload to panic, anxiety, anger. If you have ever had a panic attack or an anxiety attack, you will have great empathy for anyone who has gone through that because it gets all of your attention and it is completely overwhelming. Maybe you find yourself as that stress overload continues to push, you find yourself exhibiting anger at a level that would not be normally like you. You find yourself in traffic getting more upset with people. You're yelling at the television. These expressions of anger that don't normally fit with how you like to do life. And then you go to the final part here where you keep pushing into that stress overload and you find yourself in that burnout and breakdown where you just can't seem to get back where you had been. Now, I want to point this out because people who care deeply, I believe, are more susceptible to being on the right side of this because you'll see that desire to make a difference is so profound that they push through connecting the idea of being fatigued or exhausted with sacrificing, and they're willing to sacrifice. And then they find themselves in panic, anxiety, and anger. And I want to point that out, and I want you to see what that looks like in your own life. I know for me, I find that anxiety, for whatever reason, I don't know why this is, but for whatever reason, for me, when that anxiety hits, it tends to be literally at 3 o'clock in the morning, I wake up with that feeling on my chest of how are we going to do this? I find myself going down a path where I'm start thinking about all the things that I can't fix and I can't change and I can't do much about. That would be an indication that the stress overload is too much. I remember the other day I was on my way to an event. I was feeling that stress overload, and I was trying to tell Garmin, my little Garmin on my dashboard there. I'm trying to tell Garmin where I want to go, but Garmin evidently does not speak English. And I find myself getting angry with this machine. All of those are really clear indicators that the stress overload is a part of your life. And I want to point this out because what will happen here is that panic, anxiety, and anger, because of some reasons I'm going to show you in a moment, because you have pushed through things like that in the past, you continue pushing forward until you find yourself not loving the very things that were the motivators for you to do what you were doing when you started. It's a very real thing, and we're going to talk about why and what to do about it. So the shortcut here, a few years ago, I love national parks, by the way, and behind me, these are all patches from different national parks. I like to waste money by buying things I can't use. And so here we have patches that I don't know what to do with, but we have them. And so I like to go to the national parks. And a couple years ago, we went to Colorado and we got a cabin. And the cabin where we were staying was around 9,500 feet elevation. And it was a place I had not been before. And I got there and I found I was struggling with some altitude sickness, which I don't normally get. But I found that I carried the bags up the stairs to the bedroom, and I thought, I'm having trouble breathing here, you know, and I started just feeling it. I had a headache and the whole thing, and I went on the internet and I said, okay, typed in there what to do when you have altitude sickness. And so I typed that in there. You can type it in yourself. What do you do when that happens? And the number one answer came back, and it was something that was so obvious it actually made me laugh because the answer was go to a lower level. Like the literal answer was stop being where you are. That was the actual first answer. First thing to do is to stop doing that. And then the second thing, you can try this, this, and this. Now, I'm saying this to you because I want to be really clear that when the stress overload is happening, the only way to get back to peak performance is to reduce the stress overload, to get back to a spot that works for you. I'm not talking about the unwillingness to sacrifice or the inevitable pain of growth. I'm talking about carrying something that you can't actually carry. It is too much. I want you to process this with me today. So I want you to see where you are, and if you would be willing to do this with the truth serum going on here, if you could go ahead and put into the chat, if I asked you, and it's up to you if you want to answer or not, but I would appreciate that. If you looked at this and you said, let me tell you where I really am, and you looked at this chart right now, where would you identify yourself? And if you want to put that in the chat, I would love to see where you are today, right now. This doesn't mean you're there all the time, but where are you currently? Thank you. I'm seeing fatigued. What other answers might you have? Fatigued? Exhaustion? Exhaustion. Thank you for sharing those. What I want you to see is that what you're experiencing is not unusual. I want you to see what you're up against right now. And I would also say this, when most leaders tell me fatigued, I go ahead and elevate it to exhaustion because they struggle with just being able to say, this is where I am. And I know that's biased, but I want to just tell you the truth. And so you see where you are. Now, looking at peak performance, I want you to look at peak performance and I want you to ask yourself this question. Is it your responsibility to operate at peak performance, even if it means you have to say no to some things? Is peak performance viewed as a luxury or a responsibility? So if I'm looking at you and I'm saying, okay, we need you in game shape. You're a leader in this organization. You're a leader in this, whatever it may be. People are counting on you to be in game shape. And if that's the case, we want you to be at peak performance. Is that viewed as a luxury or a responsibility that you have? So if I look at this and I say, we want to have you at peak performance more often than not, if we could imagine what that's like, then I'd be asking you to identify what that is so that we can begin the process of moving that way. But I want you to see the idea first, and then I want to just give a few background pieces to this. Some of this is very familiar, but I want to make sure we're using the same words. Stress is the body's response to a stressor. And there are two different types of stress, at least. The acute stress is the short term. It comes and goes quickly. It might be viewed as the fight or flight response. And then there's the chronic stress, the longer term stress that can last for weeks or months or longer at a time. When we experience stress, our body begins to respond immediately to that by releasing hormones in response. But when we have that response for a prolonged period of time, it begins to work negatively towards our overall health. Examples of stressors that are pretty familiar: major life changes. They can be positive or negative. I remember talking to a person one time who had received an inheritance, an unexpected inheritance of a couple of $1 million. And he said to me, I don't know how to say this, and I don't think I can say it to many people out loud. I am stressed out by receiving this inheritance because I don't know what I need to do to not lose it. And he was very stressed by it. And he said, I know if I say that out loud, people are going to give me a hard time. So the major life change can be positive or it can be negative, the environment that you're in. My brother, I look at him and what he has done to help young people have great lives. He is a principal at an inner city school in Little Rock, Arkansas. It's an elementary school. And what he found at this school, where 100% of the students receive breakfast and lunch from the state, what he found is that kids, this is a crazy idea, kids that come to school who have food in their stomachs and feel safe at school tend to do better. It's a crazy idea. So he began focusing on this idea that we're going to start by making sure that the kids have a meal, but instead of just presenting them a meal that they can pick up on the way in, they have breakfast at school in the homeroom, served family style with the teacher every morning. Now, what is he doing? He's changing the environment. He's providing an oasis. What causes stress? Unexpected disruptions, changes, fluctuations in prices, availability, social pressures, an amazing number of social pressures right now, family expectations, internal fears. And I would say this for you as a leader, as a manager, in my experience, over 80% of people who are in leadership positions would say to me that the number one challenge they face is self-doubt, imposter syndrome, uncertainty. I don't know how this is going to play out. What's the future going to be? Assumptions, beliefs. Examples at work might be being asked to give a presentation to colleagues, concerns over the global economy, insecurity about opportunities for promotion. What happens if I don't get asked? What happens if I do? Look at this one, lack of rest due to long hours. People tend to be working longer hours during COVID than they did before. Discrimination, harassment, working in an unsupportive environment, unclear expectations. Now, I want you to see these because these are all stressors that come into our lives. And I want to be really thoughtful with you about this reality. Caregivers and problem solvers are more likely to experience stress overload, and let me tell you why. Leaders tend to experience what's called leader stress. And leaders have experienced COVID differently than most people. Caregivers have experienced COVID differently than most people, and I would say problem solvers have for this reason. Whether we like it or not, in times of crisis, people look to the leaders in their midst to determine how they should respond. If leaders are calm, people are likely to be calm. If leaders are more agitated, people are likely to be more agitated. And leaders are aware that they are being watched. So when you look at leader stress and you look at the challenges of being someone who has to come up with original answers and be a problem solver, what you're seeing is that it takes more willpower now than ever not to let everybody know how you might actually be feeling. So what happens? If you think of willpower like a muscle, that muscle for people in leadership roles is being exerted throughout the day at a very high level. And so as they are going through their day, they're having to use a lot of willpower to stay focused and to stay aware of how they are being, how people are responding to them. Now, that leader stress means that by the time you often leave work and come home, your willpower has been depleted. And so when you get home, your willpower has been depleted. Now, you know how this works. This is why if you want to exercise daily, if you will exercise in the morning, you're more likely to do it than in the evening. And in the way it works, by the evening, I've come up with reasons not to do it. By the evening, my willpower has been depleted. This is why most people don't do this. It, I was out with the crew last night. I don't know, it was 1 o'clock in the morning. It was crazy, and we started talking about what we wanted to do, and we decided to create a nonprofit, and we're going to be feeding the poor. It typically doesn't work like that. Typically, the longer people are awake and the longer they're out, the decisions that they make are more regrettable because their willpower is depleted. That's why you come home after a long day at work and you mistreat the people you love the most. It's not because you don't love them, it is because you are exhausted and your willpower has been depleted. So what you're seeing is that some people are experiencing the stress of COVID in a different way. Leaders specifically are having a harder time accessing the executive function of their brain and being able to put themselves in other people's shoes. It takes a lot of mental energy to imagine what someone else is going through when you're going through something yourself. And so what you're seeing right now is that leaders, as they're going through this, and people who are in positions of influence, they are struggling with a few things. And you might find yourself that same way, where you just kind of feel fuzzy. You get tripped up by simple questions like, what is today? And you have to think about it. You might find yourself searching for words that you didn't have to search for before. These are all part of what people are experiencing in leadership roles as they are dealing with this. Let's look at the things that we can do about it. Let me give you a little bit more behind it, then we can look at what to do about it. Keith Stanovich and Richard West proposed that the brain works really with multiple systems and two systems specifically in mind that process information. This was then popularized by Daniel Kahneman in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And this is what they proposed, and that has now been adopted largely, is that there's system one in your brain and there's system two. System one is what you do automatically with little effort. You're just able to do it. And this is what the typical person uses for 95% of the day. So system one, if I said to you, 2 + 2 equals, you would know the answer without having to think it through. If I said, tell me the title of the book, it's by Tolstoy, it's a War and, you would know the answer without having to sort it in your mind. That's system one. Quickly, with little or no effort, no sense of voluntary control over this, I just know. System one, this is what you use 95% of your day, and keep in mind the way the brain works. The brain is an amazing thing to me. Your brain takes up 2 to 3% of your overall body weight, but it takes up to 20% of your overall energy use on a given day. And so the brain is focusing on what it can do to be as efficient as possible because your brain's trying to keep in reserve the energy needed to respond to something that might be a stressor. So your brain is constantly looking for habit loops and ways of doing things that lower the stress on it because it doesn't want to be pushed if it can help it because it's an incredibly efficient thing. System one allows us to do that. System one, 95% of the day, I'm using system one, I just respond. This is what I'm doing. System two is different. System two allocates attention to the effortful mental activities that demand it, including complex computations. The operations of System 2 are often associated with the subjective experience of agency, choice, and concentration. I'll give you some examples here in a moment, but I want to point out why one way to reduce stress is to have the more challenging meetings earlier in the day. The times in which you're going to need to really think, that is not a Friday at 3 time typically. If I can do that earlier in the day, I'm more likely to have a better outcome. Let's look at what this means. Examples in order of complexity of things System 1 can do. Watch what your brain can do in System 1. Determine that an object is at a greater distance than another. You don't have to think about it. You just know. System 1. Localize the source of a specific sound. Your brain can tell you it's coming from over there. It's probably a car, and you've got that. You can do that. Complete the phrase, as I mentioned a moment ago, war and peace. Look at this one. I actually had some pictures on here and I took them out, but I was going to show you gruesome images and I thought this probably isn't the right thing to do, but I was going to show you images that without prompting you to create, to make your face show disgust, you will show the concern of seeing something that isn't right. The same way if I show you the picture of a child or a baby smiling, you'll smile and you don't realize you are. Your brain's responding to it. Solving 2 plus 2 does not require deep thinking. System 1, you know. Now keep going with this. Read text on a billboard. You're driving by, you see, you didn't concentrate, it's there. Drive a car on an empty road. Have you ever found that driving a car on an empty road is one of the most relaxing things that you can do? That windshield time helps a lot because you don't have to think. Your brain is functioning without you concentrating. Think of a good chess move, which is fascinating to me. A chess master is not thinking as deeply as you might think. They have already worked through this is how they should respond and would have a hard time expressing why. Understand simple sentences. Look at this one. This is fascinating to me. Associate the description. Now imagine this. I'm telling you, I'm looking for somebody that we could hire, and I'm looking for someone who, is a quiet and structured person with an eye for details. I'm looking for someone who is quiet and structured, that has an eye for details, and you would link that to a specific job in your mind right now, that would be a good description for the person who would be in that role. Interesting. Now, this is what your brain is doing in System 1. Now, watch what System 2 does. System 2 is fascinating to me again. Now, I'm saying this because when you're being pushed to do System 2 things, your brain is being pushed to do more, which is where the stressor can happen. Let's look at the things here. Prepare yourself for the start of a sprint. You ever seen the stress that comes with that? As people are waiting for the moment and they're waiting and they're waiting, and it requires all of their concentration. Fascinating. Now, I thought this was very specific, and I wondered what the researcher's background was on this one. Direct your attention towards the clown at the circus. This is the Where's Waldo kind of thing. Direct your attention towards someone at a loud party. I have to concentrate, focus in. I'm listening to you. But it requires me to work at it. Look for the woman with the gray hair in the room. I have to look for it. I have to concentrate. Try to recognize a sound. You ever had that moment where you had everybody turn off everything that was going on because you could, or you got to, and you found yourself focusing in on this? Let me give you some more practical ones. You ever walked with somebody who was a fast walker and found yourself being irritated by it? Why do you have to walk so fast? Part of what's happening is your brain is having to tell your body, speed up, speed up, speed up, speed up, and it is wearing you out. This is why when people go for hikes, they typically say, hike your own hike, and we'll start here and we'll meet together there. But if you're walking with somebody who is walking at a different rate of speed, it becomes a less enjoyable experience because you're having to think versus being able to just enjoy the walk. Determine the appropriateness of a particular behavior in a social setting. Should I say this? Should I not? Count the number of A's in a certain text. You ever done this one? Park in a tight parking space. Have you ever turned off the radio and made everybody in the car get quiet so that you could park the car? What was happening? You're reducing the noise because you need to concentrate. Level 2, system 2, excuse me. Determine the price or quality ratio of products. Now, I'm saying this to you, you go on Amazon or you go to a store and you're comparing the shopping. Have you ever found that that is a completely exhausting thing for you? Which washing machine should we buy? And you work on this for 30 minutes. Then you say to yourself, I don't care what kind it is, just get that one. Why? Because it's the system 2 thinking and it is uncomfortable. This is why we'd rather just have Consumer Reports tell us what to buy. Or the number of stars on the Amazon rating. I don't want to have to think about it. Just tell me what to do. Determine the validity of a complex logical reasoning. As much as we would like to think that people are going to read your Facebook post, understand the value of what you're saying, they're not looking for it. They just want a response. A little bit farther. This is what's happening. Your brain wants to be at ease. And what makes you feel at ease? Repeated experience, clear display, a primed idea, a good mood. Now, I want to say this again. Your brain wants to be at ease. And what your brain wants to do is to go with the first thing that fits the story that's already in your head. Let's look at this. We want what feels familiar, what feels true, what feels good, and what feels effortless. This is why the bias is so high, because what we're looking for is what feels familiar, what feels true, what feels good, what feels effortless. And as much as we would want people to be willing to push themselves to the next level, people tend to want to just have their brain at ease. Back to that system 2, I don't think I put it on there. Maybe I missed it. If I said to you, what is 17 times 24? Well, with a piece of paper, you might be able to get that answer, but most people are not going to be able to do that easily in their mind. And so when you look at what's happening, people will have to look that up because your brain is saying, we're not at ease yet. We need to know the answer. But what do we want? We just want the answer, then move on. Even if, let me be thoughtful here, what Kahneman would get at, Daniel Kahneman, when you think about feeling very confident about a decision, what you're talking about is the fit in your brain, not whether what you believe is right. It fits. It doesn't mean it's right. So let's look at the next thing. What does this mean for you? Some of my favorite work right now is the work from Richard Boyatzis. Dr. Boyatzis is at Case Western. If you'd like to look up his work, he has quite a bit that you can see on YouTube and things like that. Dr. Boyatzis really began to gain notoriety in the world of brain science because he was one of the early discoverers of what would become emotional intelligence. Well, later he began to go through brain scans of how people think and how they operate, et cetera, with some of the positive psychology stuff. And he came back with the idea of the intentional change theory. And this is where I want to focus for the last few minutes. The intentional change theory is this idea that if you look at how the brain operates, when you are making a decision because you're trying to avoid pain, your brain functions very differently than when you are looking to make a decision based upon something that you were wanting to do. And so what he found was that when you are making a decision that is to avoid pain, or I have to do this, then that activates the part of the brain known as the negative emotional attractor, the NEA. And the NEA is really good at prompting change, but not sustaining change. And then there's the PEA, which is the positive emotional attractor part of the brain. The PEA is what sustains change. And so if I look at the positive emotional attractor, what they found when they were working with people who were in healthcare is that people would be told by their doctor. The doctor said, if you don't, looking at your chart here, this is the situation. If you don't lose 30 pounds and change your diet, you're going to have a heart attack. And what they found is that people at a rate of over 90% would change their behavior for a time, but less than 10% would stay consistent with the change. And by the time a year had passed, people had moved back to what they had been before. They found if the doctor didn't say, you need to do this or you're going to have a heart attack, if the doctor would begin with this process, tell me about the ideal version of you as it pertains to your health. What's your ideal health for where you are in life right now? And he said the ideal part is important because it's not telling me about the best version of you, because the ideal version of you might be different. The best version of you as an athlete might be in the past. The best version of you as a thinker might be in the future. We're talking about where you are right now. Tell me about the ideal version of you. Now, the reason that we have a lot of stress in part is because we have not recalibrated for where we are in life now. I'm not asking where you had been before COVID. I'm not asking where you had been before. I'm asking you where you are right now. And I want you to think about the ideal version of you. And let's look at some specifics here. I want you to imagine the ideal version of you in a team meeting, on a phone call. I want you to imagine the ideal version of you in a one-on-one meeting. I want you to imagine what it would be like to be the ideal version of you giving someone great, meaningful feedback. I want you to think about the mindset that you would need to be in to receive great feedback. Now, I want you to do this because I want you to decide what course you need to be on, because a big part of the stress is trying to reconcile what had been or could be. And I'm trying to bring you back to focus, because at the heart of stress is that the focus is too broad. And we're trying to focus back in on where you need to be. For the vast majority of us, what's happening in the Ukraine should not be our focus. They're not asking us what policy they should follow. I'm not talking about being a narcissist. I'm talking about having the humility to recognize we can't do everything. Where do I need to focus? It's a culture of choosing. It's the recognition that I have to be able to say no to some things so that I can preserve the energy needed to do my job well. And if I'm looking at you in the role that you're in right now, you're saying, well, I can't slow down. I'm trying to get across the idea that you slowing down increases the likelihood that you'll do more. What if slowing down, taking time for recovery for yourself, was the very thing that allowed you to get more done? At the heart of this idea, let's go back to the ideal version of you. The ideal version of you, how rested would you be? How much time would you need to have to think? And we start the calibration based upon this. Now, I'm saying this because at some point in your life, you come to this moment where you have to reckon with, are you the CEO of your life or not? And if you don't like where your life is right now, then I've got to ask the question, then who's in charge of it? And if you are the CEO of your life, and I'm looking at your life, and this is what you're trying to get done, then you would have to make some hard choices along the way to be able to maximize your life. And I'm asking you to contemplate this because here's what will happen. If you're not careful, you will let other people tell you the pace that you should have, the life that you should have, and that may not be a fit for you. And you find yourself in a position of being overstressed, and then you find yourself feeling that you can't keep up. And here we go. The way it works is pretty straightforward. And I want to be really thoughtful here. I saw a meme the other day and it drove me crazy because it worked. And now I can't say memes are they're a waste of my time because this one worked on me. And it was this one little screen and it said this: quit being vague about what you want. So how do I start with the stress reduction? It is by having the humility to say, I can't do everything. I'm going to focus in on these things, and then I'm going to push back against this tide that is saying, do one more thing, do one more thing. What I'm trying to get across is that by you doing less, you are going to be able to accomplish more. We saw it when people started going from a 40-hour work week where they might work 8 or 10 hours a day for 5 days. They found that people started cutting back and they were going to 8-hour days. And if they went to 8-hour days, they got more done. Then they found that they went to 4 10s and then cut that to 4 8s. Amazingly to me, companies that are using 4 8s right now are more productive than companies that have 4 10s or a 5 10. The longer amount of time you're working does not translate to getting more done. The question is, how rested are you in the process? Last thing, and I'll open it up to you. I want to go to a specific thing here. At the heart of this idea is the Hebbian theory, which was created by Donald Hebb in 1949, which is not that long ago, really. And this is what Hebb came up with. Cells that fire together, wire together. You might have heard that phrase before. It's at the heart of neuroplasticity. Cells that wire together, fire together. And what he began to notice was that neurons in their initial state began to be activated by the stimulus that came from this priming. So if I did something one way one time, I was more likely to do it the same way the second time, and I was more likely to do it the third way the third time, and it became my habit. And so if I do this over time and time again, this way of doing something becomes how I do things. Now, let me show you real quickly. If you wouldn't mind real quickly, if you would go ahead and cross your arms, I'll show you how this works. I want you to cross your arms, and I want you to notice something. About half of you will put your left over the right. The other half will do the other way. Now watch this. If you wouldn't mind, go ahead and switch it and then hold it the way that feels uncomfortable. Now, first of all, some of you you're saying, yeah, I didn't realize we were going to do math. I'm not sure even how to do this. So get to the spot that feels uncomfortable and hold it. And here's what normally happens. About 10% of people bail right now. This is stupid. You're stupid. Oxygen's stupid. Your mom's stupid. Like they are out. Some of you are doing this, but you're not hearing a word I'm saying because it's bothering you. It feels uncomfortable. Now watch this. Put it back the other way that felt comfortable. Better, isn't it? That's the Hebbian theory. Wires that fire together, wire together. So when you were a kid, you started crossing your arms. The first time you did it, made it more likely you do it the second time that way. And the third time, you might not have even thought about it because that's how you do it. Now, I want to be thoughtful here because at the heart of stress is a pacing mechanism that was often set years ago that might need some revision. And people say, well, how would I change that? You can change your mind. And by changing your mind, you can change your brain. It's not easy because as I grow older, it becomes more challenging for me. And the reason it becomes more challenging for me is not because my brain lacks the ability, it's because I have to unlearn one way of doing things to then learn a new way of doing things. So when I see someone in my organization, let's say, and they are at the age of 70, when my parents began learning Spanish, I need to have greater appreciation for them because the amount of effort required to learn a new thing is higher. It is not a matter of desire. This is because they've learned so much, it takes longer to be able to reset and learn a new way. I'm saying this to you because at any point in your life, you can choose to be the CEO of your life again. You can change how you think, but the longer you've been doing it one way requires greater effort. I'm going to stop here. At the heart of this, I want to claim ownership of your life. That you're saying, this is the ideal version of me, that working at peak performance is not a luxury item, that I'm going to look at my life and focus in on what I really want to accomplish in my life, and then I'm going to reduce the stress level so that I can function at that level of peak performance because I can do more with less when I'm not having to overcome the fatigue, et cetera, that goes along with it. I want to present the idea because I want to be clear here. For years, I worked harder. I don't know about you all. I started working when I was 14, 40 hours a week. I was the janitor at the mall. And then then I became the janitor at the high school I attended. And so my kids can't complain about anything about work ever. Those are my jobs. Now I'm saying this to you because I bought into this belief that I've got to do more and more and more and more. And what the science is saying is that by doing less, I can do more. So if the concern is I've got more to do, I'm telling you a rested you can do more than a fatigued you. If the outcome is really the issue, then claim that role of CEO in your life. Okay, so I'll stop here. I went a little bit long. We've got a few questions that are coming in. Thank you, by the way, earlier for sharing where you were on that. That's not a forever thing. That's where you are right now, and I appreciate that. Terry shared, you got my attention when you referenced humility and creating boundaries. I struggle with feeling too responsible from childhood woundedness. I have long been aware, I'm now 68, but tend to stay very stuck. Beautiful, Terry. Thank you for sharing that. I get it. I don't know about you all, but I do not remember a day of my childhood when we did not have children living in our home who were in foster care. The need is real. There's always someone who can be served. What I'm trying to get across is that if we want to maximize the service, we have to create this expectation that you can be at game shape, which means we have got to take care of you so you can take care of more people is the idea. I'm not talking about narcissism. I'm talking about the discipline required to serve people at the highest level. Other thoughts? Questions? Please speak to small or reduced staffs who right now must function at high levels. Again, I won't get asked to speak at this ever again, I'm afraid, but I'll tell you what we did. When we got hit by COVID, I had to let go 40% of our staff, none of whom had worked with us for less than a decade. It is going to impact me for the rest of my life. It wasn't for a business decision. It was because of what was going on and what do you do? We recognized that the level of effort required was going to be higher. So we made the decision that we would have people on our team take every other Friday off so that they could be rested enough to do the work. It's counterintuitive, but I am trying to say creating those boundaries for your team so that they can remain in the peak performance and rested will allow them to get more done. I'll also say that people who have jobs where they're not having to do a lot of original thinking, where they are able to do, let's say, the same work over and over again, it does not have the same taxing impact on the brain as someone who's having to figure out something that might be original thinking along the way or has to have creativity. And so oddly enough, when we began now a year and a half ago, having people take off every other Friday for restoration, in essence, the workload increased. We got more done, not less done. People who are exhausted can't just gut it out. They have nothing left. And I want to just be thoughtful about this. I'm not asking you to not give me your all. I'm saying once you've given your all, there's nothing left to give. So I have to go back and reset. And so that feeling of guilt and shame that comes in of I've got to go back to work. The idea is you're going to be able to do more by being rested. And so if I have a small team and a big task, them being rested, and I'll give you an example. I used to, let's say I was traveling and I got someplace and it was midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and I got an email and they needed me to write something for the next day. I used to stay up that evening and write, and it might be 1, 2, or 3 o'clock in the morning. What I found was that that was a mistake. So instead, I would go to sleep, put the alarm on, wake up, and a rested me could write the same thing in 30 minutes that it would take me 3 hours when I'm exhausted. It's a strategy. Uh, the Okay, thank you. So Terry shared one of the early jobs at an Oklahoma City nonprofit gave us 5 mental health days a year. We felt so respected and treasured for those days. And it's a good strategy. And I want to be thoughtful here. If you want better outcomes, I'm not talking about just being kind and nice and respectful, which I think you should be. I'm saying that the data supports the idea that when people are rested, they do a lot more work. And so it's not even just from a benevolent perspective, it's just good strategy that I would have you contemplate along the way. It feels very counterintuitive, I get it. Can you share some resources that I can provide to our higher leadership team on the importance of giving staff the opportunity to slow down? I would literally just Google that of impact of reduced work hours on rest. Some of the things that you might see on this would be the book Deep Work, which I think is a very helpful scientific research study into some of this. Then you've got things like Peak Performance, which is a book that has a lot about this. But the data on this, you should be able to find really quickly that it was unexpected. But the unexpected result of having people change their hours by slowing down was that they sped up. And I want to be thoughtful, very thoughtful in my response to this. I'm not talking about getting less done and making peace with it. I'm saying choosing a pace that makes sense allows you to get more done. So the outcome is actually better. Thank you, Sandy.
Wow.
I, I,
Um,
I think that's about where we are. So I'm going to stop and hand it back to Janine. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Boy, did we need this right now. Thank you so much for being with us today. Also, I do want to remind you guys very quickly before we get off of here, if you have an event of something you want me to get out to our Count Me In for Kids or Healthy Community Collaborative, either one, I would be happy to send that out for you if you'll just put it in the chat. And also, we do record these, and so we put them on our YouTube channel. Steve does that, and so feel free to look up Lynn Institute for Healthcare Research on YouTube, and you will see Nathan as our speaker for Count Me In for Kids. And Nathan, I just want to say thank you so much. I can't remember the last time I really got to hear you, but every time I do, I walk away with such a wealth of information and so much affirmation. And so thank you really for being here with us today and for touching us and for sending us on with such great information to start putting into our lives. So
It was an honor to be invited, and I will just say thank you to all of you for what you're doing. There are not many hills worth taking to the discomfort, the pain needed to accomplish these things. And I genuinely believe that what you're doing is worth it. And if you want to know where the leaders are, look at where the challenges are. And I'm just so grateful for each of you for your passion for what you're doing. And I'll say that the honor is mine to be here, and you all are the source of inspiration. And I'm just grateful to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. And thank you for being here today, for taking time out of your day to spend it with us, and to get together and at least be able to see each other on Zoom. And we look forward to having you at our next meeting, which will be in March. And until then, take care, take heart to some of the things we heard today, and have a great day and a great week.